The text message that destroyed my life came at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was standing in front of a jury, seconds away from winning the biggest case of my career. When my phone screen lit up on the defense table, I shouldn't have looked. But I did. "Mom, you manipulative little bitch. You're going to regret this." 17 more messages flooded in before I could blink. My phone started buzzing so violently it fell off the table. The bailiff picked it up, glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. He handed it back to me without a word. The jury foreman was announcing the verdict. Guilty on all counts. My colleagues were congratulating me, but I was staring at my phone, watching my face appear on every news alert. Ungrateful daughter steals dying judge's fortune. Heritage thief Mackenzie Reed accused of elder abuse. Prosecutor faces lawsuit from heartbroken parents. I hadn't seen my mother in 3 years. I hadn't seen my father in 5. And now they were suing me for my grandfather's estate. The grandfather they had abandoned. The man who raised me. When they dumped me at his door and never looked back. Here's what they didn't tell the cameras. Here's what those headlines left out. And if you want to know what really happened in that courtroom, what it takes to fight the people who gave you life but never gave you love, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe, because this story is going to make you question everything you think you know about family. Drop a comment and tell me, when blood turns against you, how far would you go to protect the people who actually stayed? Now let me take you back 32 years. To the day I learned what family really means. I was 3 years old when they left me. Not at an orphanage. Not with social services. They left me at my grandparents' house in Charleston for what my mother called a weekend visit. Kissed me on the forehead, and drove away in their Mercedes. That was the last time I saw them for 6 years. I was 3 years old when my parents dropped me off at my grandparents' house in Charleston for what they called a weekend visit. Celeste, my mother, was a stunning woman with honey blonde hair and sharp green eyes that could cut through you with a single glance. She worked in real estate. Or so she said. Though I later learned her actual career consisted of spending my grandfather's money and attending charity galas where she could be photographed. Gavin, my father, was a perpetually unsuccessful entrepreneur with a new business venture every 6 months and a gambling problem he thought nobody knew about. That weekend visit turned into a week, then a month, then a year. I remember asking Grandma June when Mommy was coming back. She had pulled me onto her lap, her soft hands smelling of the hibiscus flowers she tended in the garden, and said simply, "Sweetheart, you're home now." And that was that. My grandfather, Judge Franklin Blackwood, was a towering figure in South Carolina's legal community. He had served on the state Supreme Court for 20 years before retiring to senior status. His study was lined with law books, and he smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco. He was stern but fair, and he treated me not as a burden but as a gift. Every Sunday, without fail, we had dinner together. Grandma June would make her famous shrimp and grits, and Grandpa would quiz me on vocabulary words. Legal terms. Anything to sharpen my mind. I learned later, much later, that Celeste and Gavin had simply decided parenthood was inconvenient. Celeste had her social calendar, her appearances at country clubs and yacht parties. Gavin had his poker games and his desperate attempts to network his way into wealth. A 3-year-old didn't fit into that picture. So they left me, completely and without apology, in the care of people who actually wanted me. For the first few years, they would call occasionally. Birthdays were hit or miss. Christmas cards sometimes arrived in January, usually with a generic message and no gift. But by the time I was 7, even those sparse communications had dried up almost entirely. I stopped waiting for them. I stopped asking about them. I had Grandma June's warm hugs and Grandpa's gruff encouragement, and that was more than enough. Martha, our housekeeper, had been with the family for 25 years by the time I came to live there permanently. She was a black woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She became like an aunt to me, teaching me how to bake, how to garden, how to be a good person. She saw everything, heard everything, and remembered everything. That would matter later. When I was 12, Grandma June was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I watched my elegant, strong grandmother undergo chemotherapy. I held the bucket when she was sick, I helped her into the bath when she was too weak to stand. I read to her when she couldn't sleep. Grandpa and I took turns staying up with her on the bad nights. Where were Celeste and Gavin during this time? I found out later they had sent a fruit basket to the hospital. Once. And a card that said, "Thinking of you." Grandma June survived. But she was never quite the same. The cancer had taken something from her. Some essential vitality. Still, she made 5 more years. 5 precious years where we continued our Sunday dinners and our garden walks and our long conversations about everything and nothing. It was during one of those conversations, when I was 16, that Grandma June first talked to me about the will. We were sitting in the garden, the South Carolina sun warm on our faces, and she had taken my hand. "Mackenzie," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Your grandfather and I have been talking, and we want you to know something. We're changing our will. Everything will go to you." I had pulled my hand away, horrified. "Grandma? No, that's not right. What about Mom?" She had looked at me with those wise, tired eyes. "Baby girl, your mother made her choices. We made ours. We chose you because you chose us. Every single day for 13 years. You chose us, but I didn't feel like I had chosen anything. I had simply stayed I had stayed because there was nowhere else to go. And then I had stayed because this was home. And these were my people. The idea of inheritance, of money, had never crossed my mind. I was more worried about my chemistry homework and whether I would make the debate team. I had tried to argue, but Grandpa had walked out then, his hand on Grandma's shoulder, and he had said in that judge voice of his, "The decision is made. Mackenzie, this is our estate, or legacy, and we choose to leave it to the person who has been our family. Not by blood alone, but by presence, by love, by choice." 3 years later, Grandma June passed away quietly in her sleep. I was 19, home from college for the summer. I had crawled into bed with Grandpa that night, both of us silent in our grief, and I felt something break inside him that never quite healed. Celeste and Gavin showed up to the funeral in designer clothes, weeping dramatically. Celeste had embraced me, the first time she had touched me in years, and whispered, "I'm so sorry. Baby. Mom loved you so much." It had taken every ounce of control not to push her away. Where had she been when Grandma was dying? Where had she been during the chemotherapy? The bad nights? The slow fade? They stayed for exactly 2 hours after the service, just long enough to be seen. And then they were gone again. I didn't hear from them for another 6 months. I threw myself into my education. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of South Carolina, then went to Duke Law School. Following in Grandpa's footsteps, he attended my law school graduation. 83 years old, but still sharp as a tack, his eyes bright with pride. That was one of the last truly good days we had. When I was 28, I returned to Charleston to take a position as an assistant district attorney. I moved back into the house with Grandpa. He was 86 by then, and while his mind was still brilliant, his body was starting to fail. He had good days and bad days. On good days, we would sit in his study and debate legal philosophy for hours. On bad days, I would help him to the bathroom and make sure he took his medications and just sit with him while he slept. For 4 more years, this was our routine. Martha still came every day, helping with the cooking and cleaning. But the hands-on care fell to me. I was the one who made sure he ate. I was the one who drove him to doctor's appointments. I was the one who held his hand during the scary moments when he thought he might be having a heart attack or a stroke. And where were Celeste and Gavin? They called once every few months, usually asking if Grandpa needed anything, but never actually offering to come visit or help. I found out later, courtesy of a private investigator I would eventually hire, that they had been in contact with Grandpa primarily via email during this time. Hundreds of emails over the years, and not one of them mentioned me. They were all requests for money, complaints about their financial difficulties, excuses for why they couldn't visit. May 12, 2001. Can't make it to Mackenzie's piano recital. Can you wire us the deposit for the Manhattan condo? December 23, 2003. Sorry we'll miss Christmas again. Gavin's business deal fell through. Could really use help with the mortgage. August 15, 2008 heard Mackenzie graduated law school. We wanted to be there. Wire transfer for the country club membership would really help right now. On and on it went. A paper trail of absence and greed. The final 18 months of Grandpa's life were the hardest. He developed congestive heart failure, and there were multiple hospital stays. I took a leave of absence from work to care for him full-time. I learned how to manage his medications, how to watch for signs of fluid retention, how to make him comfortable when breathing became difficult. Dr. Benjamin Thorne, Grandpa's longtime friend and personal physician, visited regularly. He was amazed at Grandpa's mental acuity, despite his physical decline. Your grandfather could still argue a Supreme Court case, he told me once. His mind is as sharp as it was 30 years ago. This would become important later. Devastatingly important. 3 months before Grandpa died. Something strange happened. Celeste called, which was unusual enough, but she was particularly sweet, asking about Grandpa's health, wondering if she should come visit. I had been surprised and, I'll admit, hopeful. Maybe she had finally realized what she had been missing. She did come visit. Once, bringing Gavin. They stayed for an afternoon, taking photos with Grandpa, posting them on social media with captions about family and love and legacy. Grandpa had been polite but distant. After they left, he had looked at me and said, "They smell blood in the water. Mackenzie, be careful." I hadn't understood then. I do now. 2 weeks after that visit, a new doctor showed up at the house. Dr. William Barrett, youngish, overly friendly, explaining that he had been recommended by Celeste as a specialist in geriatric care. Grandpa had been confused, saying he already had a doctor. But I had foolishly thought it couldn't hurt to get a second opinion. Doctor, Barrett examined Grandpa and then pulled me aside. "He's showing signs of cognitive decline," he said gravely. "Some memory issues. Possible early dementia. I'd recommend some medication to help keep him calm and comfortable." I should have questioned it. I should have called Dr. Thorne immediately, but I was exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep a night, and I trusted that a doctor recommended by family must have good intentions. Dr. Barrett prescribed a mild sedative, which Grandpa took for about 3 weeks. It was Dr. Thorne, during one of his regular visits, who caught it. "What the hell is this?" he had demanded, holding up the pill bottle. "Franklin doesn't need sedatives. His anxiety levels are completely normal. Who prescribed this?" When I told him about Dr. Barrett, his face had darkened. "Mackenzie, listen to me very carefully. Your grandfather is not experiencing cognitive decline. His mental faculties are completely intact. This medication is unnecessary and potentially harmful. Stop it immediately." I did, that very day. And within 48 hours, Grandpa was back to his normal self, which made me realize he had been slightly foggier during those 3 weeks. Foggy enough, perhaps, that someone might later claim he wasn't in his right mind. But I had bigger worries then. Grandpa's heart was failing, and we both knew time was running short. He spent his final week setting his affairs in order. He met with his attorney, Amelia Chase, multiple times. He reviewed his will, made some final adjustments, and signed everything in front of witnesses. One evening, about a week before he died, he called me into his study. He had me sit in his old leather chair, the one he used to sit in when he was on the state Supreme Court. "Mackenzie," he said, his voice weak but clear, "I need you to understand something. Your grandmother and I changed our will 10 years ago, when she was still alive. We made this decision together, and I have reaffirmed it multiple times since then. Everything goes to you. Not because I don't love Celeste. She's my daughter, but because she made her choices, and you made yours. You stayed. You chose us as your family. And we chose you." Grandpa, I had started, but he had held up a hand. "Let me finish. What's coming is going to be hard. Celeste will fight this. She'll say terrible things about you. About me, she'll claim I wasn't in my right mind. But I am. Mackenzie, I am as clear-headed right now as I have ever been in my life. You are my heir not because of blood, but because of love and presence and sacrifice. You earned this. not through manipulation, but through showing up every single day for 32 years. He had written a letter, too, which he placed in his safe deposit box at the bank, with explicit instructions that it be opened only if his will was contested. I didn't know about that letter then, but it would save everything later. Judge Franklin Blackwood died on a Tuesday morning in March, with me holding his hand and Martha crying quietly in the doorway. Dr. Thorne pronounced him dead at 8:15 a.m. His last words to me were, "You're going to be fine. Sweetheart, you're stronger than all of them." I had no idea how much I would need that strength. The funeral was a major event in Charleston. Grandpa had been a beloved figure in the legal community, and hundreds of people attended. Celeste and Gavin showed up in coordinated black outfits, crying theatrically, playing the role of grieving daughter and son-in-law. Celeste had even tried to sit in the front row next to me, but I had asked her, quietly but firmly, to move back. At the reception afterward, I overheard Gavin talking to someone about the estate, speculating about the value of the house, the investments, the legacy. I felt sick. 1 week after the funeral, Amelia Chase, Grandpa's attorney and now mine, called me into her office for the reading of the will. Celeste and Gavin were there, dressed immaculately, Celeste with an expectant smile on her face. Amelia had read through the standard language, and then came the critical part. To my beloved granddaughter, Mackenzie Reed Blackwood. I leave the entirety of my estate, including, but not limited to my residence at 247 Trad Street, all financial assets, all investments, and all personal property. She has been my family in the truest sense of the word, and I entrust my legacy to her capable hands. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Celeste's face had transformed from pleasant expectation to pure rage in the span of a heartbeat. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "Dad wouldn't do this. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly." Gavin had stood up, his face red. "We're his blood family. You can't just cut us out." Amelia had remained calm. Judge Blackwood was of sound mind and body when he executed this wilayah. It was witnessed properly and notarized. This is his final testament. Celeste had turned on me then, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. "You manipulated him. You kept him away from us. You poisoned his mind against his own daughter." I had stood up, my voice cold and steady. "I didn't keep him from anyone. Celeste, you stayed away all by yourselves for 30 years. Don't blame me because you finally realized what you threw away." They had stormed out, but not before Gavin had spun around and pointed at me. "We'll see you in court. Mackenzie. This isn't over." And it wasn't. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was filed. Celeste Blackwood and Gavin Harrington versus Mackenzie Reed, contesting the will on grounds of undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, and elder abuse. The claims were outrageous and entirely fabricated, but they were also public record. The media picked it up immediately. Daughter sues daughter, family feud over judge's estate. The narrative Celeste spun was masterful. She portrayed herself as a loving mother who had been cruelly separated from her father by a manipulative granddaughter. She claimed I had isolated Grandpa, turned him against his family, and coerced him into changing his will while he was mentally incapacitated. She held a press conference, dressed in elegant black, tears streaming down her face. My father was a proud man, but in his final years, he became vulnerable. My daughter took advantage of that vulnerability. She kept him from me, from his only child, and she twisted his mind against me. All I want is justice for my father and for our family. It was a complete fabrication, but it was compelling. The comments on news articles were vicious. "Gold digger. Manipulative bitch. How could she do that to her own mother?" I received death threats via email and social media. My colleagues at the DA's office started looking at me differently. Some avoided me in the hallways. I wanted to fight back publicly, to tell the truth, but Amelia advised against it. "Don't engage with the media," she said. "We'll tell our story in court, where it matters, where we can present evidence." So I stayed silent, which made me look guilty to many people. I threw myself into preparing for trial, spending every evening going through Grandpa's papers, his correspondence, his medical records, Anything that could prove he had been of sound mind and that I had not manipulated him. I hired a private investigator, Detective Leo Harris, a gruff former cop with a talent for uncovering uncomfortable truths. I gave him one instruction: find out everything about Celeste and Gavin's finances and activities over the past 5 years. What he found was damning. Celeste and Gavin were drowning in debt. They had invested in multiple failed business ventures, lost hundreds of thousands in bad real estate deals, and Gavin's gambling losses were staggering. They were facing foreclosure on their home, defaulting on multiple credit cards, and being pursued by several creditors. They didn't just want Grandpa's money. They desperately needed it. Harris also uncovered something else: Dr. William Barrett, the doctor who had prescribed those unnecessary sedatives to Grandpa, was Celeste's second cousin. They had attended the same medical conference together 3 months before Barrett showed up at our house. The whole thing had been a setup, an attempt to create evidence that Grandpa wasn't mentally competent. The trial began on a sweltering morning in August. 6 months after Grandpa's death, the Charleston County Courthouse was packed with spectators, reporters, and legal observers. This wasn't just a will contest anymore. It had become a referendum on family, duty, blood versus choice. Judge Harold Cross presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness and no tolerance for theatrics. Celeste and Gavin sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, Richard Steele, a slick lawyer known for winning emotional cases through manipulation of juries and inflammatory rhetoric. Amelia and I sat at the defense table. I was dressed conservatively in a navy suit, my hair pulled back, trying to look professional and calm even though my heart was hammering. As Celeste entered the courtroom, she walked right past me and paused just long enough to whisper, "You're still just a little girl playing dress-up. Mackenzie, you'll never be good enough." I didn't respond. I just looked at her, steady and unflinching, until she moved on. Steele's opening statement was exactly what I expected. Emotional manipulation wrapped in legal language. This is a case about a vulnerable elderly man, a distinguished judge, who in his final years fell under the influence of a granddaughter who had her eye on his fortune. Celeste Blackwood loved her father, but she was prevented from seeing him, from caring for him, by Mackenzie Reed, who systematically isolated Judge Blackwood and convinced him to disinherit his own daughter. Amelia's opening was cooler, more factual. This is a case about a man who made a choice, a deliberate, well-considered choice, to leave his estate to the person who had been his family for 32 years. Mackenzie Reed did not manipulate Judge Blackwood. She loved him, cared for him, and honored him, which is more than can be said for the plaintiffs, who ignored him for decades until they needed his money. The first witnesses were Celeste and Gavin themselves. Celeste took the stand in a beautiful cream-colored dress, her hair perfectly styled, tears already forming in her eyes. Steele led her through a fabricated narrative of devoted daughterhood. She claimed she had wanted to visit Grandpa regularly, but that I had discouraged it, screening his calls, turning him against her. She spoke of how much she loved him, how she had tried to reconnect, how devastated she was to lose him and then discover she had been written out of his will. It was a masterful performance, and I could see some people in the gallery nodding sympathetically. When Amelia stood for cross-examination, her voice was sharp but controlled. "Ms. Blackwood, in the 32 years that Mackenzie lived with your father, how many times did you visit?" Celeste hesitated. I visited when I could. My life was in New York. It was difficult to get away." "How many times?" Amelia repeated. "I don't know exactly." Amelia picked up a document. "According to your own testimony and discovery, you visited your father's home approximately 12 times in 32 years. That's less than once every 3 years. Does that sound like the behavior of a devoted daughter?" Celeste's composure cracked slightly. "I called. I sent letters." Amelia nodded. "You did call. We have records of those calls. Should we discuss what you talked about during those calls?" Steele objected, but Judge Cross overruled him. Amelia continued. "You called your father 63 times in 22 years. Do you know how many of those calls included a request for money?" Celeste's face flushed. "I don't. All of them, Miss Blackwood. Every single one. You called to ask for money. You emailed to ask for money. And in not one of those communications did you ask about Mackenzie, the granddaughter you claim to love. Not once. Celeste was visibly shaking now. That's not fair. You're twisting things. Am I Amelia held up a thick stack of papers? These are emails between you and your father spanning 2 decades. Should we read some of them to the court? And then she did. One by one. In a cold, clear voice that filled the courtroom. Each email was a variation on the same theme: money troubles, business opportunities, desperate requests for funds, and elaborate excuses for why Celeste and Gavin couldn't visit. May 12, 2001. Can't make it to Mackenzie's recital. Need the deposit for the Manhattan condo. December 23, 2003. Sorry to miss Christmas. Gavin's deal fell through. Help with the mortgage. August 15. 2008 heard Mackenzie graduated. Country club membership dues are killing us. With each email, Celeste seemed to shrink in her seat. By the time Amelia finished, the sympathetic looks from the gallery had turned to disgust. Gavin's testimony was no better. He tried to portray Grandpa as a confused old man, easily manipulated. But under Amelia's cross-examination, he couldn't provide a single specific example of Grandpa's supposed confusion. He stammered, contradicted himself, and eventually admitted he hadn't actually spent significant time with Grandpa in over a decade. Then came the surprise witness, the one that would blow their case apart. Richard Steele stood with a confident smile. The plaintiffs called Dr. William Barrett. Dr. Barrett entered the courtroom, a nervous-looking man in his 40s with thinning hair and a habit of touching his tie. He was sworn in and took the seat. Steele walked him through his credentials and then got to the point. Dr. Barrett, you treated Judge Blackwood in the final months of his life. Correct. Yes, I did. Can you describe his mental state? Barrett glanced at Celeste. Judge Blackwood was experiencing some cognitive decline, memory issues, confusion, difficulty making complex decisions. In my professional opinion, he was vulnerable to influence. I felt my stomach clench. This was bad. But then I noticed something: a small tick. A way Barrett had of touching his left earlobe when he spoke. I had seen that gesture before. And suddenly, a memory surfaced. A medical conference I had attended with Grandpa 2 years ago. A brief encounter in a hallway. A man standing next to Celeste, touching his earlobe just like that. I scribbled a note and passed it to Amelia. He's related to Celeste. I've seen them together. Amelia's eyes widened. She immediately pulled out her laptop and started searching. Within minutes, she had found a social media photo from that conference. Celeste and Dr. William Barrett, tagged as cousins. When Amelia stood for cross-examination, her smile was cold. Dr. Barrett, did you know Ms. Blackwood? Before you began treating her father, Barrett shifted in his seat. We had met socially. You're second cousins. Are you not? His face went pale. Yes. But that doesn't. Did Ms. Blackwood recommend you to Mackenzie Reed as a specialist in geriatric care? She mentioned I might be able to help, and you prescribed sedatives to Judge Blackwood. Correct. Mild sedatives. Yes. For anxiety. Amelia held up a document. This is Judge Blackwood's medical file from his longtime physician, Dr. Benjamin Thorne. Dr. Thorne's notes indicate that Judge Blackwood had no anxiety disorder and no need for sedatives. In fact, Dr. Thorne explicitly noted that Judge Blackwood's mental faculties were completely intact. Were you aware of this? Barrett's hands were shaking now. I based my treatment on my own examination. An examination that lasted how long? About 45 minutes. One 45-minute examination. And you concluded that a man with no history of cognitive decline suddenly had memory issues. A man whose personal physician of 30 years said he was mentally sharp. It was my professional judgment. Amelia's voice turned to ice. Or was it your cousin's request? Did Celeste Blackwood ask you to prescribe medication that might make her father appear confused or incapacitated? Steele jumped up, objecting loudly. But the damage was done. Barrett was looking at Celeste with panic in his eyes, and Celeste was staring at the table, her face ashen, Judge Cross sustained the objection but instructed the jury to note the relationship between Barrett and Celeste. The judge's expression made it clear what he thought of this convenient family connection. Our witnesses came next. Martha took the stand, dignified and strong. She spoke about 32 years of watching me grow up in that house, of watching me care for Grandpa in his final years, of never once seeing any kind of manipulation or coercion. When Steele tried to suggest Martha was being paid to testify, she stood up in the witness box, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "How dare you suggest that I would lie for money? I worked for that family for 25 years. I saw everything. I saw that little girl grow up without her parents. I saw her sit by her grandmother's hospital bed during chemotherapy. I saw her give up her career to take care of her grandfather. And I saw Celeste and Gavin show up exactly twice in all those years. Both times asking for money. Don't you dare question my integrity?" The courtroom had erupted in applause, which Judge Cross quickly gavelled down. But the point was made. Dr. Thorne testified next, bringing decades of medical expertise. He reviewed Grandpa's medical records in detail, explaining that Grandpa had been in excellent mental health until his death. There was no dementia, no confusion, no vulnerability to manipulation. Judge Blackwood was as sharp at 90 as he had been at 60. I would have trusted him to argue a case before the Supreme Court a week before he died. The evidence was overwhelming. But Amelia saved the most important piece for last. Grandpa's letter. Amelia entered it into evidence. A handwritten letter in Grandpa's distinctive script, written just 2 weeks before his death, witnessed and notarized by his longtime friend and fellow judge. Amelia read it aloud, and I felt tears burning in my eyes. "To whom it may concern, I, Franklin Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, write this letter to clarify my intentions regarding my estate. My granddaughter, Mackenzie Reed, is my sole heir, not because of any manipulation or coercion, but because she has been my true family for 32 years. My daughter, Celeste, made her choices. She chose her life in New York, her social ambitions, and her husband's business ventures over her daughter and her parents. I do not begrudge her those choices, but I will not reward them." Mackenzie stayed. She gave up opportunities, sacrificed her own comfort, and devoted herself to caring for her grandmother and me. She earned this inheritance through love, loyalty, and presence. I leave everything to her because she chose us when no one else did. That is the truest definition of family. By the time Amelia finished reading, several people in the gallery were crying. I was crying. Even Judge Cross had to pause to compose himself. During a recess, I overheard Celeste and Gavin arguing in the hallway, their voices carrying, despite their attempts to whisper, "You promised Barrett would handle this. Celeste dijiste. Now everything's falling apart. This is your fault." Gavin shot back. "You pushed too hard. You had to call her an ungrateful bitch on television. Now everyone hates us." I walked past them without a word, and Celeste's eyes followed me, full of impotent rage. Later that day, Steele approached Amelia with a settlement offer. His clients would drop the lawsuit if I agreed to pay their legal fees and give them a small portion of the estate. Amelia looked at me, waiting for my response. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "No," I said. "They took 32 years from me. They don't get a dime." The next day, it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand with my head high, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Amelia led me through my story. From that first weekend visit that became permanent, through Grandma June's cancer, through Grandpa's final years. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth. I was 3 when they dropped me off. I'm 35 now. I stayed because I loved my grandparents. And they loved me. I took care of Grandpa because he took care of me my entire life. I never asked for his money. I never even thought about it. He chose to leave me his estate because I chose to be his family. Every single day for 32 years. When Steele stood for cross-examination, he tried to rattle me with aggressive questions. "Miss Reed, do you really expect us to believe you spent 32 years caring for your grandfather without any expectation of financial reward?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, Mr. Steele, because some of us understand that love isn't a transaction, Don't you think it's suspicious that Judge Blackwood changed his will 10 years ago? Right around the time you moved back to Charleston. He changed it 13 years ago, when my grandmother was still alive, and it was their joint decision. And I moved back because my grandfather needed me, not because I wanted his house. You're a prosecutor. Ms. Reed, you make a good salary. Why did you need to live with your grandfather? I didn't need to live with him. He needed me to live with him. There's a difference. I gave up a bigger job in Washington, D.C., to come home and make sure he wasn't alone. Steele tried for another hour. But I didn't break. I had spent 32 years living this truth. No lawyer could twist it into something it wasn't. The final arguments came 2 days later. Steele gave an emotional plea about the sanctity of blood family, about a daughter's right to her father's legacy, about the tragedy of a man being turned against his own child. Amelia's closing argument was quieter but infinitely more powerful. She didn't shout or gesticulate. She simply stood before the jury and asked them a question. What is a parent? Is it the person who gives birth to you? Or the person who raises you? Is it the person who shares your DNA? Or the person who sits with you through chickenpox and helps you with homework and teaches you how to be a good human being? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. Judge Blackwood knew the answer to that question. So did his wife, June. They raised Mackenzie from the age of 3. They attended every school play, every graduation, every important moment of her life. Where were Celeste and Gavin in New York? Living their lives, calling only when they needed money. They visited 12 times in 32 years. 12 times. That's not a parent. That's a stranger who occasionally remembers you exist. Amelia picked up the stack of emails again, holding them high. These documents tell a story. Not the story Celeste wants you to believe, but the real story. A story of a woman who saw her father as a bank account, not a human being. A story of a couple so desperate for money that they hired a relative to falsely diagnose an elderly man with cognitive decline. A story of people who ignored a child for 3 decades and then had the audacity to demand her inheritance when their financial schemes collapsed. She walked over to our table and placed her hand on my shoulder. Mackenzie Reed didn't manipulate Judge Blackwood. She loved him. She cared for him. She sacrificed for him. And when he chose to leave her his estate, it wasn't because he was confused or coerced. It was because she earned it. Not through scheming, not through isolation, but through presence, through showing up, day after day, year after year, when no one else did. Amelia turned back to the jury. This case isn't about money. It's about what we value as a society. Do we value blood above all else? Or do we value love, commitment, and sacrifice? Judge Blackwood made his choice. He chose the granddaughter who stayed over the daughter who left. He chose love over biology. And that choice, members of the jury, was not only his right, but the right choice. She paused again, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the courtroom. Celeste Blackwood wants you to believe that blood creates obligation, that DNA entitles her to a fortune she never earned. But Judge Franklin Blackwood understood something deeper. Family isn't who you're born to. Family is who stays when everyone else walks away. Mackenzie stayed. For 32 years, she stayed. That's why she inherited. Not because of manipulation, but because of love. The courtroom was silent when she sat down. I saw several jurors wiping their eyes. Even Judge Cross seemed moved. But we didn't have a jury trial. This was a bench trial, meaning Judge Cross would make the decision himself. We had chosen that route deliberately, knowing that a judge would focus on evidence rather than emotion. The waiting was agony. Judge Cross took 3 days to review all the evidence, all the testimony, all the documents. 3 days where I barely slept, barely ate, just replayed everything in my mind and wondered if the truth would be enough. On the 4th day, we returned to the courtroom for the verdict. The gallery was packed again, reporters filling every available seat. Celeste and Gavin sat at their table, Celeste's face set in determined lines, as if she could will the outcome she wanted. Judge Cross interred, and we all stood. When we sat again, he began to speak, his voice grave and authoritative. I have reviewed all evidence presented in this case, including witness testimony, medical records, financial documents, correspondence, and Judge Blackwood's final letter. This court must determine whether Judge Franklin Blackwood possessed testamentary capacity when he executed his will, and whether he was subject to undue influence by the defendant, Mackenzie Reed. He paused, looking directly at Celeste and Gavin. The evidence overwhelmingly supports that Judge Blackwood was of sound mind until his death. His personal physician, Dr. Benjamin Thorne, testified credibly that the judge's mental faculties were intact. The only contrary testimony came from Dr. William Barrett, whose credibility was severely undermined by his familial relationship to the plaintiff and his brief, single examination of the deceased. The court finds Dr. Barrett's testimony unreliable and potentially influenced by his relationship with Ms. Blackwood. Celeste's face had gone white. Furthermore, the court finds no evidence of undue influence. The testimony of Martha Hughes, Dr. Thorne, and Mackenzie Reed herself, along with Judge Blackwood's own written statement, paint a clear picture. Miss Reed did not isolate Judge Blackwood from his family. Rather, the plaintiff and her husband chose to maintain minimal contact with Judge Blackwood for over 3 decades, visiting rarely and contacting him primarily to request financial assistance. Judge Cross picked up the stack of emails. These communications demonstrate a pattern of financial dependence rather than familial affection. The plaintiff's claims that she was prevented from visiting her father are contradicted by the evidence, which shows she chose not to visit except on rare occasions. The court also notes the suspicious timing of Dr. Barrett's involvement and the prescription of unnecessary sedatives, which suggests an attempt to manufacture evidence of incompetence. He set the papers down and looked directly at me. The court finds that Judge Blackwood's decision to leave his entire estate to his granddaughter was made freely, with full mental capacity, and was based on 32 years of loving care and devotion. Ms. Reed earned this inheritance not through manipulation, but through unwavering commitment to her grandparents. He turned back to Celeste and Gavin, and his voice hardened. The plaintiff's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the court finds that this action was brought in bad faith, with no reasonable basis in law or fact, and constituted a frivolous claim designed to harass the defendant and extract money from her. Therefore, pursuant to state statute governing frivolous litigation, the plaintiffs are ordered to pay the defendant's reasonable attorney's fees and costs. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I just sat there, unable to process what had happened. Then Amelia grabbed my hand and squeezed, and I realized I had won. Not just won, but won so completely that Celeste and Gavin would have to pay for putting me through this nightmare. Celeste shot to her feet, her face contorted with rage. This isn't over. We'll appeal. Judge Cross's voice was ice. Ms. Blackwood, I suggest you consult with your attorney before making any further legal decisions. This court's ruling is based on overwhelming evidence. An appeal would be equally frivolous and would result in additional sanctions. I suggest you accept this outcome and move forward with your life. Steele was gathering his papers frantically, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Gavin had his head in his hands, and Celeste was staring at me with such pure hatred that I felt it like a physical force. As they tried to leave through a side door, a reporter caught up to them. Microphone extended. Ms. Blackwood, do you have any comment on the ruling? Celeste stopped, unable to help herself. Her ego, overriding her common sense? Will appeal. This isn't justice. My father's legacy was stolen by a manipulative opportunist who... I walked over then, Amelia beside me, and Celeste's words died in her throat. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw her clearly, not as the mother I had longed for, not as the elegant society woman she pretended to be, but as exactly what she was, a selfish, greedy person who had thrown away everything meaningful in pursuit of money and status. You want to know what your legacy is? Celeste said quietly, aware that cameras were rolling, but no longer caring. Your legacy isn't Dad's money. Your legacy is 32 Christmases you missed, 32 birthdays you forgot. It's a daughter you abandoned and parents you ignored until you needed their bank account. That's what you're leaving behind. Not money, not property, but absence. That's all you ever gave any of us. Gavin tried to pull Celeste away, but she jerked her arm free, stepping toward me. You think you're so much better than me. You think staying in that house makes you special. I didn't step back. No, I don't think I'm better than you. I think I made different choices. I chose love over ambition. I chose presence over comfort. And Grandpa chose me because of those choices. That's not manipulation. That's consequence. I turned and walked away. Amelia beside me, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Celeste's voice rising in anger, but I didn't care anymore. She couldn't hurt me now. She had no power over me, no claim on my life, or my inheritance, or my future. Outside the courthouse, Martha was waiting, tears streaming down her face. She pulled me into a fierce hug, and I finally let myself cry. All the tension and fear and anger of the past months pouring out. You did it, baby girl, she whispered. Your grandpa would be so proud. The media coverage that followed was brutal for Celeste and Gavin. The story shifted from ungrateful daughter steals inheritance to greedy parents sue devoted granddaughter who cared for dying judge. The emails, the fake doctor, the 32-year absence. It all came out in excruciating detail. Detective Harris sent me his final report with a note. Thought you'd want to know. Celeste and Gavin filed for bankruptcy 2 months after the trial. Their house was foreclosed. Last I heard, they'd moved to Florida. Separately. Looks like they're not even together anymore. I felt nothing when I read it. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Nothing. They had made their choices. And now they were living with the consequences. I, on the other hand, was thriving. I returned to work at the DA's office, and my colleagues, who had been distant during the trial, welcomed me back with genuine warmth. Many had followed the case and understood now what had really happened. 6 months after the trial, I was offered a judgeship. At 35, I would be one of the youngest judges in South Carolina history. I would be sitting on the same circuit court bench where Grandpa had once presided. The swearing-in ceremony was held in the same courtroom where my trial had taken place. Martha was there, in the front row, beaming with pride. Amelia was there, having become not just my attorney but one of my closest friends. Dr. Thorne was there. My colleagues from the DA's office were there. As I took the oath, my hand on the Bible, I thought about Grandpa. I thought about Sunday dinners and legal debates in his study, and the way he had looked at me the day before he died and told me I was stronger than all of them. He had been right. My first day in chambers, I sat in the judge's chair, the same chair Grandpa had occupied for 20 years, and looked around at the law books lining the walls, the desk where I would write opinions, the window overlooking downtown Charleston. On the desk, I placed a framed photo me at age 5, sitting on Grandpa's lap while he read to me, Grandma June standing behind us with her hand on his shoulder. We all looked happy, like the family we were. That evening, I drove to Magnolia Cemetery, where Grandpa and Grandma June were buried side by side. I brought red hibiscus flowers, Grandma's favorite, and placed them on both graves. I kept my promise, I said softly. Kneeling between them, I protected what you built. I honored what you gave me. And I'm going to keep making you proud. Every single day, the sun was setting over Charleston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And I felt at peace for the first time since Grandpa had died. 1 year after my appointment to the bench, I made a decision. I turned Grandpa's house, the house where I had grown up, into a foundation. The Judge Franklin and June Blackwood Foundation for Children in Need provides housing, education support, and legal advocacy for children who, like me, have been abandoned or neglected by their biological parents but found love with other family members. Martha runs the day-to-day operations. We host Sunday dinners there every week, open to any child in the program, any foster family, any kid who needs a safe place and a hot meal. The dining room where Grandpa, Grandma, and I shared so many meals is now filled with laughter and conversation. Just as it should be. I still live in the house, in my old room, surrounded by memories. But now those memories are being joined by new ones, created by kids who need what I once needed. Proof that family is about choice, not blood. Celeste and Gavin never appealed. I heard through Charleston's gossip network that they divorced 2 years after the trial, each blaming the other for their downfall. Celeste moved to Tampa and works as a real estate agent. Gavin apparently lives somewhere in Nevada. I've never tried to contact them. And they've never tried to contact me. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what happened, if I wish things had been different, if I've forgiven them. The answer is complicated. I don't regret standing up for myself or honoring Grandpa's wishes. I don't wish things had been different because everything that happened made me who I am. As for forgiveness, I've let go of my anger. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. They made their choices. I made mine. We all live with the consequences. What I've learned, what this entire experience taught me, is that family isn't defined by genetics. It's defined by presence, by sacrifice, by showing up on ordinary days when nothing special is happening, but your presence matters anyway. Grandpa and Grandma June were my real parents. Martha was my real family. The people who stayed, who cared, who loved me not because they had to, but because they chose to. Those were my people, and the greatest gift they gave me wasn't money, or property, or even their name. It was the understanding that I was worthy of love, that I deserved to be chosen, that my presence mattered. That's the inheritance I carry every day. That's the legacy that money could never buy. Now, here's what I want to ask you. What does family mean to you? Is it the people who share your blood, or the people who show up when it matters? Have you ever had to choose between obligation and self-respect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who has ever felt unworthy, anyone who has been abandoned, anyone who has had to fight for their right to be loved. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about resilience, justice, and finding family in unexpected places. And share this with someone who needs to hear that they are enough, just as they are. Because at the end of the day, the truth is simple: you are not defined by the people who leave you. You are defined by the people who stay, and by your choice to stay for others. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us family. And that's a truth worth inheriting.